Hello, my name is Alex Iles and welcome to the Chapel of Newcastle's castle. Now this chapel is a beautiful part of the castle. It's a wonderful example of Norman architecture, and you can see the Norman arches at the top above me, and alongside that as well, above the doorways as well. Unfortunately, these aren't original. They're restorations done by a northeast architect called John Dobson in 1847. But they give you an idea of the beauty of what this chapel would have been like during the medieval period. Now this chapel is very much in the Norman style, and the Normans, when they invaded England in 1066, were a deeply religious people. They wanted to bring what they saw as a new form of religious orthodoxy back into the British Isles. Now, when I say orthodoxy, I'm not referring to the Orthodox Church, but as in instead that they believed the English were lax in their Christianity, that they didn't practice and worship God fervently enough. And so the Normans built a lot of churches. They brought over new forms of religious worship and groups of monks as well to the British Isles, and established monasteries and churches across the country to ensure that everyone in England would have access to well-trained, educated and fervent monks and priests who therefore would ensure that the souls of the English would be saved. So that was a big part of the Normans and how they came to this country. Now, the chapel here at Newcastle's castle would not have been for the common man. This instead was a royal chapel because Newcastle's castle was a royal castle. Now, unlike other castles which were owned by barons and lords, and their importance and responsibility would be to control a part of the country for the king, instead this was a king's castle. This was a seat of royal power in the region, and so the king's sheriff would be here. It would be a place of justice and law and order right up here in the northeast of England. And whenever the royal family came up here, if it was just for a state visit, or if it was to conduct war against the Scots, or to defend the country against the Scots, or for another reason, they would also need a place to worship. So while they were staying here at the castle, this is the chapel where the royal family would worship, and we have evidence for services and the Christmas service as well, held by various monarchs when they came up here to the northeast of England. Architecturally, it's changed over the years. So the doorway you can see just to the left of me right here, that I'm now facing, didn't used to exist. This was quarried through at a later point when they were restoring the castle, and originally the chapel would have been inaccessible to the rest of the castle. So you would have entered through the doorway just over here, come inside, and then had your religious service. Now, when you were inside here as well, it would have just been for the royal family. The members of the garrison and other people who lived and worked inside the castle would have worshipped at another church which was on the site of the castle and inside the castle's walls, but was not for the royal family to worship at. That was for the common folk and the members of the garrison, whereas the royal family, their closest retainers and friends, would worship inside here. Coming forwards, you would come down here, and as you entered this area, on my left-hand side here, this is where the altar would be. So the priest would conduct the service from over there, and then inside the nook that you can just see over there, inside that area, would be where the holy items were kept. So that would be where the communion was kept, and so the blood and the bread would be kept in there for communion services. So this was where the royal family would worship right the way through when the castle was an integral part of the defence of Newcastle. But as the castle changed in its role, and obviously the town walls of Newcastle were built, which were quite large, they were 30 foot high, 10 foot thick and stretched all the way around the city, suddenly the castle isn't needed as a military location anymore. So the castle is started to be abandoned, it's left into disrepair, and it's not seen as an important royal castle anymore. So when it's a ruin, we actually have evidence that the castle was used for thieves. And these thieves, they would come inside and hide in the castle and then go out and rob other parts of the town. And so it became quite a problematic area. Following on from that, later on in the history, you actually find that this is turned into a storehouse, a cellar for a nearby pub. And this nearby pub was actually called the Three Bulls Heads. It's now been demolished, and it was apparently a very rough pub in Newcastle. I've just been told recently when I spoke to David Silk, who's the education officer here at the castle, that there's a famous story of where the pub landlord actually said that he was the greatest player of a certain board game in the region, in the whole of the northeast of England, and someone else beat him at this board game. And when they beat him at this board game, he started an impromptu boxing match, which is how it's reported in the local paper. And to you and me today, this just basically means a bar fight. So if you can imagine any owner of a drinking establishment or a bar today losing a game of dice or cards, and in deciding that he was going to beat up his own clients, you really get a sense of what the Three Bulls Heads was like as a pub. It's a pretty wild pub and quite a dangerous one in some ways. But this chapel was turned into the cellar where the beer and the wine would be kept. That's if the Three Bulls Heads actually stored wine. It's a bit of a questionable one right there. But this would be where it would be stored as well, because they just kept this as a location where they could come inside, gather the beer and wine, and then go and serve it to their clients again. So you can see how the chapel changed from being a very exclusive religious site where the royal family would come, they would worship, they would gather together to show their reverence to God when they were traveling through the country, and it would be a private location for this very important family at this time, to become a location for thieves and robbers to hide out in when they were doing their raids around Newcastle, and then eventually to become a wine cellar. And then after 1847, when it's refurbished, you can see how it becomes this beautiful chapel that we can enjoy today as a part of the castle, which is, this amazing heritage site in the heart of the city that tells us a bit of the story of both the Middle Ages, then going forward into early modern period, and now into modernity as it continues to tell its story into the modern age. So I really hope you've enjoyed this information about the castle's chapel, and you'll join me for another video soon. But until then, stay safe and well, and look after yourself. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe, share the video with your friends, and also if you could give a like as well, it does help.